Before we start the panel, very quickly, I would like to introduce the panelists and the moderator. ERAY AKDAŞ will be the moderator of the session. Public Policies and Corporate Relations Director of Borusan Holding will be moderating. Sinem Sandıkçı, Gökçen. With your applause, I would like to invite her to the floor. And Tümkan Işıltan from VP Turkey Country President, and Mr. Sinan Kirici, UCB Pharma Country Leader. If I may just move you to this part of the stage, sir. The floor is yours. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, you're all welcomed. As a matter of fact, I would like to thank Mrs. Aslı Ertekin for the wonderful opening remarks and the next wonderful talk. After having heard Mr. Levent Erden, I was thinking whether it was time to close the summit. But on the contrary, we have really invaluable panelists to speak at length of our matter of debate, and hopefully it's going to be an inspiring session. The main theme of the future is appear as you are or be as you appear. By trying to create the future, and speaking of the future of ethics and compliance, one of the most important things is what we are doing today or what we are not doing today, because we are shaping up the future with every step you're making. Therefore, if you cannot concentrate on the future, it will not be possible for all of us to be successful in the future. With this understanding, I would like to ask my first question right away to Mrs. Sinem Sandıkçı, as well put by Levent Erden. You're either ethical or not. You either have values or not. But in the business world, all the companies right now claim to be the best, the most ethical. They claim to be doing the most fair. But how can we rely on them, and how can we have faith in them? On one side of the coin, you would essentially speak about an inevitable, claim of ethical things going around in the company. Then on sharing it with the public, we need to make a reference value politically, objectively, and analytically. We need to make a proper assessment. Well, turning to yourselves, so as to avoid this greenwashing or whitewashing, what kind of procedures or inner rules are you running? In terms of compliance, what do you do in terms of your relations with internal and external stakeholders? What are you doing, Sinem, as Sinem Sandıkçı Gökçen, as the first women GM of Turkey? What are you doing?
First, let's just make an introduction. L'Oréal is actually a giant of beauty. I'm trying to actually create the beauty. And one being the digital evolution, sustainability, and meaningful brands. And actually, they all have been discussed. Well, I think there is something so important because we're in the business of beauty. And ethics of beauty is under discussion since eternity. You can use beauty for good or for evil. That's the reason why it's important. The second thing is that we, as our corporate culture, there are actually not too many rules. It's all based on people. If you do not have very strong principles of ethics, the store can go anywhere. Therefore, it's very important to be a leader in the field of ethics, and we're really working hard on this. As for your question, as for sustainability, as L'Oréal, we also have a program for the future. As you all know, everyone is saying that. I actually have too many good programs in place because that's what the consumers are asking for. In terms of sustainability, it's very important that you have to be such a company. And too many people, I would say, and saying that this is what I'll be doing until 2030, this is what I'll be doing until 2050, and so on. But you need to build trust, and to do so, there could be two criteria. The first thing is to make objective assessment or accreditation. If I'm telling you is that the program for the future of L'Oreal, if it is actually a sustainability program, do you think you would believe me? You may not believe me, for example, if I just make a declaration. Or if I say, as the UN Global, for example, United Nations, according to the title given to me by UN, among corporate in the world, I'm just going to have the most inclusive program, because it is not only about my own production, but it covers all the value chain. That's what the policy that I'm speaking about. So that's how you will understand. It's not only the water that I'm using for my production. I'm also feeling responsible for the water that my consumers are using while using my product. That's how the accreditation will work, in my opinion. And likewise, if I tell you, in terms of environment, forests, water, and I can have I'm so ambitious, I will take my responsibility. Of course, you have to do it. You will take this. But then carbon disclosure project, for example, by a company making environmental assessment, 6 years in a row in environment, water, and forest, we have received A, the highest score, 3A in a row. We are the only company. I guess you will believe me much more than my declaration. Therefore, this accreditation issue is so important. The other thing is setting targets and setting goals for objective assessment. And the basis of our program, and one of the most important things is there are 9 borders of our planet. I mean, the United Nations, together with the International Science Center, there are some limits, and if you exceed it, then these limits, if you exceed those limits that we are speaking about, and 3 of them already exceeded, and therefore I base everything on that as a company. And for example, what my best goal must be until 2030, 2025, 2030, what should I do therefore this time it is, for example, again, there is an initiative, Science-Based Target Initiative. This initiative, if you do not know, with the Carbon Disclosure Project, together with the United Nations UN Global Compact and WWF, their cooperation, and therefore trying to help the corporates to set better goals. And by saying this, so I'm making everything much more accessible and objective. This is the first pillar. The second thing is that for all my stakeholders, I am just being transparent. I'm giving all my stakeholders transparent access so they can make any, for example, audit that they want. For example, for consumers to give, for example, a sustainable choice, I put a label, a sticker on my product, like a scale from A to, for example, from red to green. While purchasing a product, for example, you can transparently understand its impact on the environment. That's how you will be making your shopping. That's how you will be shopping. So there is also not only L'Oreal, by the way, all the non-governmental organizations and all our stakeholders, I'm speaking about 40 in total. So in the field of beauty, we just would like to make this sticker, this label, the standard of the beauty products. That's such an initiative. And as the last example, maybe I can tell you, and we have 25 brands in Turkey, and so as to create a meaning and add a value, we just have too many environmental and social impact. But if my consumers are saying that they also should, it's the key brand that we have, with that key product, for each product you purchase, what you're doing is you take a seed, and you can track whether for this seed, whether it's going to be planted, where it will be planted, in this location, so there's a system in place. And therefore, everything can very objectively be assessed. And therefore, it's all with a transparent communication. And I actually offer all the stakeholders this tracking. So great, thank you. Actually, 3 global leaders and the Turkey leaders are together with us. And we're just speaking about some Turkey-specific examples, practices, and also global practices as well. Of course, about this objective, again, assessment, transparency is so important. For example, as Mr. Erden said, I, for example, will lose weight and I'll be 80, 60 kg next year. Not possible. There is actually the need to have an audit. It could be United Nations, any other, but these types of tools are very important, so you have to be supported by those. If you do so, then of course compliance and ethics will be ensured. It's just like, for example, an auditor, a referee, so everything is under control. So I will skip Sinan and Tümkan Işıltan. This time a different perspective now we have. And I think it is in particular ethics and compliance. When you say this, for these, there are many steps that should be taken. And there are some security mechanisms for this, but whether we will be able to implement this, what type of an assurance we need, for example. And for example, there is a certain count that you can apply, but for this, not possible for them to use any of this line. I mean, the system may not work properly. And therefore, the global CEO and looking at the ethics have also seen. So I feel like it is important. Because sometimes there is actually the need to take some tough decisions, but it is important to take tough decisions. There is such a message. So for the system to work in place, for psychological assurance or guarantee, what is your company corporate policy or your personal approach for this? Thank you. First of all, very distinguished executives of the Turkish Ethics and Reputation Society, dear audience and very distinguished panelists, I'm more than happy to be here with you on this important talk. Well, as you would appreciate, we have this panel right after the keynote by Mr. Erdem, which makes things much more challenging. I make a list actually about the dangerous words being used. Global, for example. There is, I mean, net zero maybe is an exception because I have to mention about the net zero, but other than that, and I will try to avoid use of some of the terms. Let me just try myself, test myself. Now, Mr. Erdem stated about the speed issue, for example. Sometimes when I wake up, for example, I just wake up with the feeling, with the urge that I have to be somewhere immediately. I'm just going to be late for something. And for example, being late for a meeting and so on. During the weekend, for example, being late for the ballet performance of your children or the training and so on. I'm just saying to myself, will there be such a week that I will have no rush, but probably will get bored. But with the pandemics, I guess, other than speed, also in psychological assurance and psychological guaranteeing. For example, the emotions, our thresholds for anxiety and all change. For example, I guess our default settings also changed. I have 2 kids and I'm learning a lot from them. And they are really raising my awareness, trust me. And I can also observe their concerns and anxiety pretty well. So we are going through some anxious times and we're still going through them. It's not over yet. And the experts have quite interesting findings in terms of the mood during the pandemic. It's actually very similar to the mood that you have during the times of war. So it affects us so much. What we should do under these circumstances, and I'm just looking myself, the other executives, my co-workers and so on, if you stay calm, and if you feel that psychological issue, psychological safety that you have for you and for your family members or for your co-workers, if you possibly pass these to them, it would be much easier. Otherwise, just like the roasters with the decapitated roasters, we would have no idea where we're going. What is actually psychological safety issue? Probably the psychological safety or security. What it is, you probably will tell me. And actually, I don't know how you feel, but for example, during a meeting, we're not born as a country leader, of course. We had so many meetings that, should I ask this question? Would that be okay? Will they actually, I'm just shy. There's actually a senior there, and I was born in 1972, and they are actually older than me. They have no feelings. They're like Superman, and so on. This is resilience, I would call it. They are the country manager. They know everything. Nothing will happen to them. From this perspective, I all feel like, is it something absurd, this question? I mean, if a person can express himself or herself in an environment and speaking freely, expressing himself or herself freely, it could be even a very contradictory view, it doesn't matter. And without any feeling that I will receive a bad feedback from this, it means that you're psychologically safe, or that place is psychologically safe, I would say. Especially during times of crisis and during challenging times, we feel lonely. I observe this also on my friends, also in the health issue. When something bad happens to you, why this happens to me? Why it is me? Is it always me? Why not anyone else? However, of course, one of the biggest mistakes also in health, wherever there's a health issue, we always check the internet, the Google, and we are just doctors of our own. But I mean, there are, for example, there's information saying good things and bad things. Therefore, I'm actually very surprised because in business life, the geography that we live in has too many challenges. And we're just spending all our energy for it, and we have to do it that way. But what we're doing, and what would happen if I say so? Would that be so contradictory? I mean, it's an energy that you're wasting, and trust me, the companies should work on the problems, on innovation, rather than spending their and wasting their effort on that. And of course, in places where there's no psychological safety, trust me, not possible to speak about innovation or finding solutions to problems and so on. And the other thing is that as people are doing what if and so on, and it's really, there is someone who is saying that I will do the right thing, and that person will be left alone eventually, because that's the right thing to do, but he or she is the only one doing this. But once you start doing the right thing, then it will turn out to be wrong. Then this time, this person advocating for it started to question himself or herself, saying that in my life, for example, just some examples that I would like to give you from my own experience, for example, there is a problem. And everyone's saying that this is the most practical way of finding a solution to this. Is practical always the best solution? No. So, while telling that this practical solution is not the correct solution, people are saying that you don't understand, you're undermining it. He doesn't understand anything about operational stuff. Of course, it is easy to just give an approval by signing a paper, but the very same people, after a couple of months, would come back to you and thank you. Oh, we're happy that we did not actually take that practical solution. And people also understand eventually that the decisions that we are not taking them only for the company, also to protect ourselves, to protect our friends. In ethics and compliance issues, that's why they are so important. And what we're doing at BP, let's have say a couple of words about this. It's the English term, speak up, for example. It's a great thing, the great word, speak up. I'm not sure if the Turkish equivalence of the speak up is okay, the way that I use, but it is not good to remain silent. Once there is something wrong, by remaining silent, you give harm as much as the people who are giving harm by remaining silent. So it's very important to encourage people to speak up. And there are different channels. Each and every administrator, executive can use this. And I myself is one of the channels, for example. But you actually have to be realistic. Is it possible to come to the country manager saying that this is wrong and you are also doing it
Bunu
wrong? Do you think
beklemek ne
people
kadar
will
doğru?
speak up as such?
Gelmeyebilir
And
tabii.
do you think you should
Böyle
expect
düşününce
anything
adam
like
gelmez
this?
diyorsun.
Of
O
course,
zaman
people
ne
may
lazım
not
bize?
come to me.
Otonom kanallar var.
Then there is the need
Yani
for autonomous
herkesin
channels. What do I
başvurabildiği
mean?
ve
Channels that
mümkünse ülke
anyone
içinde
can
bu
apply,
başvuruların
anyone can address the
kesinlikle ülke
issues. I mean,
içinde bana dahi
for example,
ülke
even for
başkanı olarak
myself,
en
even as the
üstteki
country, for
pozisyondaki
example,
kişiye
manager,
dahi
as the highest
söylenmedi.
person in the country,
Ve her
it
bir
should come to me.
başvurunun
Each
titizlikle
and every, for
incelendi ve
example,
gerekli aksiyonların alındığı
application there must be
bir
handled
yapıdan
properly with due
bahsediyoruz.
diligence. This is the structure that I'm
Şunu
speaking
da
about.
söylemek lazım.
And another important
Peki,
thing in here is
başvurdu
that it's
birisi,
okay, let's assume
çalışan.
someone applied, for example,
Olması çok önemli.
a colleague or an
Hiçbir şey
employee.
olmazsa
What is
ya
important
kardeşim
is the
başvuruyoruz,
feedback. If
başvuruyoruz.
nothing
Bu
happens,
okulda
people will
dedikleri
say, I always
hakikaten
apply
birisi
and
var mı
apply,
orada, yoksa
always
robot mu
address
çalışıyor?
the issues
Ya
there.
da birisini
Is it the
koymuşlar
real
oraya,
person
hiçbir
that
şey
I'm
yapmadan
speaking
devam
to?
ediyor.
Is this a
Çünkü
robot?
orası kapalı bir
Because
kutu.
nothing happens, I receive no
Dolayısıyla
feedback because it's a closed box. No one would
bir
know
yandan
about this. So,
gizlediği
from one
o
side,
kişinin haklarını savunurken
while
diğer
advocating the
yandan
rights
da
of
etkin bir
that
şekilde
person, but on
araştırmaların
the other
yapıldığını
hand,
ve belli bir
that
müddet
person
sonra da
should
sonuçlarını
know
bir
that
şekilde
everything
söylemeniz
is
gerekiyor.
somehow
Ve
handled
hiçbir
properly.
şekilde hiç
You have to
kimsenin
provide
"Bak sen
feedback,
oraya
and
gittin,
no one, for
ben seni bir
example,
sonraki
should
dönem
never say,
görüşürüz
it's okay
şeklinde
if
bir
you do it
yaklaşım
like this, you will
bütün
pay
işi
for this.
bitiriyor.
If you have such an approach,
Bu
then this would be the
kültürü
end.
yaymak
This
yıllar
is the
sürüyor.
culture that you have
Ama
to
bir
deploy,
yanlış
and
her
it
şeyi
takes
başa
years.
sarıyor.
But if you do one
Böyle de bir
mistake,
sıkıntısı
so
var.
you
O
have to
yüzden
start from
devamlı bunun
scratch.
üzerinde
That's the
çalışmak
problem. So
gerekiyor.
you have to work on this again
Son
and
olarak
again. And
bu
lastly,
sorunun
I would say, as an
cevabını şu
answer to
sözlerimle
this question,
bitirmek
maybe
isterim. Biraz
I
uzun
would
oldu,
say, I think
kusura
I'd make
bakmayın.
it too long. Sorry for that, but
Ben hep şunu düşünüyorum
I
ve
always think to
birçoğumuzun da
myself,
düşündüğünü
and I'm
biliyorum.
sure that it is
Ben
the same
oğlumun,
for
kızımın
everyone, for my son,
veya
for my
kendimin
daughter, or for
nasıl bir
myself, I would
psikolojik
say.
ortamda çalışmak
I
isterim.
have
Bu
to
çok önemli.
understand in what type of
Çünkü
psychological environment
siz
I would like
güçlü
to
de
work.
olabilirsiniz, başka bir
You could be,
pozisyonda
for
da
example,
olabilirsiniz. Ama
would be
önemli
strong,
olan
you could be in another position and
size
so on. But
yakın,
what is important
kalben
is,
yakın duyduğunuz kişilerin
especially
nasıl bir
the
ortamda çalışmak
what
istediğini
type of an
düşünüyorsanız,
environment that
o
you
ortamı
want for
yaratmak
those people. You
biz
have to
liderlerin en
create
önemli
that
görevi diye düşünüyorum.
environment. I think we as the
Teşekkürler.
executives, that's the
Harika,
most
çok
important responsibility
Muhteşem
that we have to
notlar.
assume.
Ben
Great
izninizle böyle
words,
birkaç
by the way.
virgülün
Thank you
sondan
very
başa doğru
much.
gelerek
Maybe
tekrarlamaya çalışacağım.
will try to make
Öncelikle
a
aslında
wrap up.
empati duydum.
You mentioned
etik ve
about
uyum
empathy
sürecinden
and building
bahsederken
empathy,
niye empati
speaking
duydum?
about
Çünkü
ethics and
ben de şu
reputation.
ortamda
Why?
çalışmak istedim.
Because
Çocuğumun,
you
kızımın
always
kalbine
mention
yakın
in
anında
what
nasıl
type
bir
of an
ortamda
environment I would
çalışmasını
like to work,
isterim, nelere
myself,
maruz
my
kaldım.
son, my
Ve
daughter,
burada bir diğer
what
kritik
you would
başlıklardan
like to
bir
be
tanesi
subject to.
aslında
Another critical
liderlik ve
thing in
liderin
here is
sorgulanması ya da
leadership
liderin
and
bu kültürü
questioning
sürekli
the
olarak
leader,
aşılaması.
and the leader
İtibar
must
yönetimleri de
deploy the
böyledir ya.
culture. That's
Siz
also
her
the
şeyi
issue
40 yıl boyunca
with
muhteşem
reputation. For
yaparsınız.
40 years you do
Ta ki bir
everything
an bir kötü bir şey
perfectly,
olur.
but something bad
Her şey
happens,
yıkılır.
then
40 yıl değil belki
everything
80 yıl aynı
collapsed.
noktaya gelir hale
Maybe
gelirsiniz.
the very
Onun
same thing
olmaması
would
için
happen
işte
after 80
herkes o
years.
güveni sürekli aşılamak.
Because
Speak
you
up
have
gibi,
to
sesini
always
yükselt,
speak up
yüksek
culture,
sesler ol.
raising, for
Açıkça konuş
example,
mesela.
yourself,
Harika,
express
aynen.
Burada
yourself
sözünüzü
clearly.
futboldan bir örnek vermek
Maybe
isterim.
an
90 dakika
example
kaleci muhteşem
from
oynadı. 4
football.
sonuçta
For
gol yedi.
90
Ne
minutes,
oldu?
for example, the goalkeeper
Beni
did
yanaştırıp
everything so
yanaştıramadım.
perfectly well, but take the goal, so will
Kusura bakmayın,
fail.
sesimde bir aksilik var.
I'm sorry, I actually have something
Çok
wrong
güzel
with my
noktalar ve burada
voice, but great
açık
points
söylemek,
mentioned.
net
So,
bir şekilde bu
to be
düzeltmeyi
crystal
kendisinin
clear,
sağlamasını
to
mümkün
express
kılmak
yourself properly.
Bunun için de otonom karardan bahsettiniz.
You mentioned
Aslında
about
doğru olan
autonomous.
şeylerin doğru şekilde alınmasını
Again,
sağlayabilmek.
decision
Aslında ben
taking
orada şunu
is really
biraz
so
alt mesaj
important.
olarak
But I
okuyorum.
think there's
Siz
another
lider
thing.
olarak veya kimse o
As
lider.
a leader, whoever the
Lider
leader is,
kendisinin
the
eleştirilmesine,
leader
kendisinin hoşuna
should do
gitmeyecek şeyleri duymaya hazır
self-critic
olduğuna ve bununla ilgili
and
bir
should show
cezalandırma
people
çalıştırmayacağına
that
dair güvence vermezse siz
even
kontrol
once the
ediyor.
leader is criticized, he, she will
sessiz
change
kapalı
himself for
olmaması
herself,
Birisi
and
beni
no one will
götürdü.
be punished for
Belki
this.
çok iyi tepki yarattı.
I don't know, maybe
Ama dönüşü
something
almadığı
will
sürece insanlarda
actually
endişe yaratabiliyor.
can
O zaman da
create a
sistem belli bir
reaction,
başka
but you
koreksiyona
you
girme
have to provide a
riski yaratıyor.
feedback. So there's
Çok
such
teşekkür ediyorum.
a
Aslında
cycle
etkileşim,
required for
işleştirme,
this. So
Levent
I
Bey,
think it's
her
really
şeyle ilgili
very
altyapı
important
oluşturmuş
for
olduğu
communication, as Mr. Erden also
etkileşimin ne kadar
stated,
önemli olduğu,
how
bunun için
important
bunları
interaction
yaşatmanın
is
değerli olduğunu
within
sağlamış
the
olduk diye
corporations and so.
Adrenalin bağımlılığından
And
kurtulmalıyız. Umuyorum
we
biraz daha
actually,
sakin
hopefully,
dinlenebiliriz.
will
En
try to calm down, no more have too much adrenaline. And I don't know, maybe for a couple of weeks we actually have to live a boring life. So, Sinan, Kirici, thank you very much, three of you. It's really so good that we have all of you here. Now I'd like to move the discussion elsewhere. You mentioned about a couple of things with sustainability. You mentioned
bizde
ESG.
çevresel, sosyal,
It is environmental, social, and governance. And these are the issues. So, how they are overlapping with compliance, how we actually have to approach to ESG, and maybe you can, for example, provide some concrete examples we would appreciate if possible. Yes, please. I will try my best, but I will start with some thank you. We're really more than honored to be here with you, and I'm sure that everything would be so much inspiring, and I'm sure that we'll get inspiration from here and reflect it to our, business life. I totally agree with you. In the pharmaceuticals, to our stakeholders, we call them professors and so on. And Mr. Erden also mentioned about the corporate terminology. Be very careful about the terms that we are using, and if at the same time I use these words during my talk, I would like to apologize in advance. ESG and sustainability. I think these two things, a healthy community, for example, a healthy environment and all. In the field of pharmaceuticals, the ESG, I would say, is especially about healthy society, which I'm a part to, and that is the healthcare issues of the society, because you develop drugs, medicines, vaccines, and healthcare equipment that we provide for. And I think this is the raison d'etre of our company. But in saying ESG, I think other than our main field of activity, what we can do for the society. Now, there is a main field of activity of each and every company, production facility, and so on we have, and they have an impact. It could be, for example, negative impact sometimes on the environment and on the society. First of all, you have to be aware of this. This is number one. If you would like to minimize the impact, it doesn't matter in which field of activity you are, you actually have to stop it, but not possible. As this is the case, I think our primary mission is, even if the society is not aware of this, try to minimize it. Even if there is a cost for it, you have to systematically work on minimizing this. This is number one. If you would appreciate it, all starts with awareness, and that's where we introduce ethics to the system. As Mr. Erden said during the day, for example, we asked the question, what is ethics? What does that mean to you? People all can have different definitions for this. For example, in my own organization, for this to work and to put it in our DNA, I'm trying to simplify it. If you're asking me if you agree or not, but these are some simple daily actions or acts that you have to do during the day, during your daily routine. If there's a healthy society, then we can exist. And we are one organ of the body of the society. So, in acting anyway, we have to create that benefit for the society, I would say. As I told you previously, in the field of sustainability, there's a fashion. I mean, really very difficult to discuss this issue without the cliché like zero decarbonization, net zero, and so on. Also, our company has several target goals for this. We have a production facility. Although we are producing something for the good of the people, but still, we have to minimize environmental impact, reducing the use of water. Or in our production facilities, we are making sure that the power generated is from renewables and so on, many other issues. But there is also such a perception in the company. I think everyone should experience this. The problems are not actually something that will be solved by thinking it, but by taking action. So at the local level, for sustainability and so as to reduce impact on the environment, we have young talents working on this issue. They build some ideas. They can have great ideas sometimes, but sometimes it could be. But with the different functions of our company, they are in touch and they can share their ideas with us. And at the executive committee meetings, for example, we're just turning them into plans and projects and so on. Young talents, they add a value and they contribute, they feel it, and which is also good for their devotion perception and loyalty. And at the same time, they actually have the opportunity to show themselves, to express themselves in this way. Thank you very much, Sinan. Actually, from different perspectives, we have the chance to approach to this. It's always, for example, there is also a team in our company, and they are actually trying to find us. It's really very important to keep these sea otters and in the company as young talents. But as you mentioned, they're very much overlapping with the values. Once we said ESG, it's a valuable set of tools, and especially if you apply principles of ESG, and if once everything is at the center of this, you're not just giving harm to the environment or so, or to the earth, and also from corporate governance, you make sure that you build a system for this. And also, you, for example, set some goals for your own, and you continue in that way while creating value for the society, but within the main field of activity, for example, pharmaceuticals, because you help people for their health, but at the same time, give them some side benefits. So back to Sinem.
Now, we've been speaking about the values, perceptions, 5 minutes ago, 5 minutes later, and digital world, a brand new world. And as soon as we arrive there, ethics and compliance becomes a different level as in other topics. There is a different level of risk and opportunity. How would you cope with that? How would you put value to it, and what kind of applications would you have? Now, the story starts with the speed of digital innovation, which is higher than lawmaking. So there is a gap in between, and ethics should be filling in this gap. Particularly companies like us who are ambitious or who have a claim on digital will have the responsibility of setting the highest standards and protecting the rights of all citizens, because we are speaking about an environment where there is a lot of vagueness. Actually, the first example is the ethics for e-commerce. Why? Because 30% and soon 40-50% of our business will be e-commerce, and what is really important in e-commerce from the side of the consumer is price wars, fake products, deception of the consumers. Therefore, our role should be to work with our stakeholders, such as the marketplaces or the retail's e-commerce websites, to furbish them with the highest ethical standards and to make rules for that. And the second thing is digital marketing, which is really a vast area. As a matter of fact, rather than targeting the consumers, down to influencer marketing or using covert methods, I think the most important priority for us would be digital media investments corresponding 60% of our digital budget. And the influencer budget is a lot higher than the TV advertisement budget. Therefore, in influencer management, we want to go beyond the expectations, the time and the practices to create our own way of working. Even from a smallest, the influencer, when I want to post something, I want him or her to state that it is cooperation. And in return for a contract, I would consider is sufficient to expect what is written in the contract. Maybe it's unfair competition, but there may be other brands who are not as sensitive as me, but this lies in my business ethics, and it's not something that I can tolerate to go against. And on the other hand, we can make a consumer targeting in any way. There are different algorithms so that agencies can knock our door and say that as you watch the competition advertisement on TV or on telephone, I can guide your advertisement to the mobile phone of that consumer. I can also make money out of my competitors' budget, and without the interference rights and approval of the consumers, I would never impose anything that would be against my rules. Another example would be actually the search engines, because as you would guess, in the search engines, particularly in cosmetics, there is a big competition going on and it's everywhere. And I want to keep hold of some words. Therefore, I'm not just using my products and websites, but I'm creating content. I mean, hairsecrets.com, makeup.com. Imagine I have 25 brands, and when you log on to makeup.com, it's roughly 15 brands together. You can think it as an objective marketplace, which can be deceiving for you. So ethics would come up, indicating that the website belongs to L'Oréal is really important, because this is the decision that is to be left to the consumers. On the other hand, as I said, big data, artificial intelligence, creepy places, I mean, in terms of ethics. Therefore, it's really vital for us to pay proper attention to it. The global digital director of our company says what makes me lose sleep is digital and its impact on the ethics. And we are setting the highest standards, and we're trying to make a role model. Wonderful examples. When we first talked, I was quite impressed by I was impressed by the way that the consumers are holding their telephones, and we're just abusing it. Abusing may not be the right word, but using it as liberally as possible. Therefore, we have the rules that are applicable by every company, and it's really important as a compass maybe for the company is to take steps in this respect, from your influencer example, for instance, indicating that it's cooperation. I mean, when you think about it, in terms of the regulatory framework or the policies, it would always follow, and the digital and the business, they would always be leading. How to find our way there? You know, the differences should be fair, right, and as said, I should be just thinking about the environment that I wish my child would live in. As a matter of fact, there are some, moments that we should be imposing strict rules. Won't name it, but a giant electronic company as a brand in the global market was said not to be able to protect the data, so L'Oréal can suspend its contract with that giant company for 6 months. I think there are big roles and responsibilities for us. Principles and values, wonderful. I mean, if your North Star is known, I think both for reputation management and reliability and credibility, I think, are quite relevant. I mean, you need to make sure that people know you better. From this point onwards, I'd like to link it to the next question. Supplier standards, as you say, training them, developing them, and just imposing them some rules that they must be following. Kanbei, I'm just turning to you. When you take a look at BP in terms of supply chain and value chain, BP seems to be located quite differently. And especially you have a big relationship and the network of relations that you need to manage for any behavior on site, since it may have an impact on your global brand. And to diversify the questions, I'd like to concentrate a bit on this. To make sure of that, from the government to the private sector, consumers, press, working with all of them, how would you manage your relations with these parties? Can you give us examples about your way of protecting your reputation and quality assurance? I always give different examples, but a striking example, maybe again from my family, maybe this time from my son. When I was a kid, we used to play on the streets, you remember, but it was also to be seen and approved by our parents whom we were playing with and what kind of games we were playing. But my son was born in 2009, and he is always locked in his door and in front of the black box and doing things. And I ask him, "What are you doing, boy?" And he tells me, "You wouldn't understand if I were to tell you," which is really, heavy for me. I'm just managing a big company, but my son treats me as such. It's a bit difficult to digest. Superbox, Nintendo, PlayStation. They're playing on something and they're gaming with other 20 people online. Who are these people? You wouldn't know them, he replies. We've just met. When you think about it, accessibility is so much important in all of our lives that it may be as good but as scary as it would be. Who are these people? What are their ethical values? So whatever the scale might be, the point I'm trying to arrive at is whatever job you are doing, there is no geographies together with the internet. And the stakeholders you are relating with are quite diverse. Therefore, there comes in a very important question. The limits are broadening and even disappearing. But in this environment, how would ethics and compliance work in this life, and how would they survive? And turning to BP from here, in more than 80 countries we are operating, and as you have said, from power generation to supply, logistics, and different subfields, we have many expertise, and we are running diverse operations, and we have many stakeholders, distributors, dealers, business partners, suppliers, many others, contractors, so on and so forth in different countries. Well, just reminds me of health, safety, environment, and security. What do we say? As first, though there may be an accident. I mean, if there is no accident, you cannot run a trade. But at the end, we said this is not the way to speak about any accident is preventable, so we need to concentrate on zero accident. We had to go through this transformation, right? And the same is true for ethics and compliance. Am I right? And O1, Levent Bey spoke about, that is actually so. Health, safety, security, they either exist or not. And the same is true for ethics. Actually, this is a dangerous guy, a dangerous stakeholder. Shall I do something for that or not? It's not the case. It either exists or not. It is this clarity that we need. Therefore, we may also approach this matter with safety, security, health, environment, procedures. This is not something you can be successful with the principles in writing. Written principles may be the starting point, but for that, of course, we need to put everything in the starting point. But how do we put it in the center? Here, again, we run the same principles. First and foremost, at all levels in the company, there are people working. And we need to raise their awareness at all levels, because we are all doing things, and with what we do, we are talking to people, and we are doing things. In every field, we, knowingly or not, there are lines that we might be approaching. When to cross the line and when not to. What to do when. Therefore, to raise this awareness, a risk-based method we need to run, which is that we have certain criteria that we need to follow in terms of the risk analysis of what you're doing, and at the same time we try and look into the higher risk and lower risk profile of our business, and as a result we take some trainings as a starting point. It's never the end, it's just the starting point. Would they suffice? Absolutely not. And we need some barriers which must be incorporated in the natural way of doing this job. I mean, it's not necessarily the trainings, because, you know, you mentioned maybe 10 times that this is dangerous and you should be doing this when this kind of a thing happens, and it's unfortunately not the guarantee for that person to follow this road. Naturally, in the natural course of the things we should be putting, it's like an example within the systematics of the BP. When we're working with a stakeholder, we first run a risk analysis, simple, moderate, and developed analysis we are running. Depending on the risk category, there is an analysis we need to run. according to
karar
the result that
mekanizmaları da
comes in,
değişir. Eğer çok riskli bir
decision
durum
mechanisms
varsa
may
ve
change. If
başka
it's a very high
çaremiz
risk
yoksa, hakikaten doğru
situation,
çalışılması gereken partner o ise,
if and
o
that
zaman
person
bununla
is the
ilgili
partner
karar
that must be worked
mekanizmasının
with,
doğru
then
alınması
the
ve
decision
alınırken de
making should be
doğru
properly done
ilave bariyerlerin
according
konulması
to
lazım.
some
Keza
additional barriers to be
sözleşmelerde
imposed.
etik ve uyum
Hence,
zaman zaman
in the
unutulan bir şeydir.
contracts,
Çünkü
ethics and
herkes
compliance may be
hemen
forgotten
ticari
from time to
kısma
time,
anlaştık mı
because, you
anlaştık.
know, it's always
Peki,
the fact that
işin
we
etik ve
jump
uyum
into
kısmı nerede?
commercial
anlaşırız.
aspect of the things. But
Sonra
where would
iki
the
tarafın
ethics
hukukçuları
and
birbirlerine
compliance
isimlendirmeleri.
lie?
Ya sen
And the
bana nasıl
lawyers
bunu
of both
dersin?
sides
Ya
would
ne
be
diyorsun?
sending,
Sen
exchanging
bunu koyarak
texts,
bana bir şey mi
and
ima ettin? Yok,
they would ask
standart
what is being
olsun diye
implied
şey
by
yapıyoruz. Yok, sen
imposing
en
a
iyisi
certain
sizinkini kabul etmiyoruz,
article,
siz bizimkini
and
kabul edin.
the
Aslında
better is
şirketler
our
aynı şeyi
version.
yapmaya,
And the two
çalışıyor ama
companies
böyle
are
çok git
trying
yerler
to
oluyor.
do the same thing.
Fakat burada önemli olan
But
bu
what
risk
is really
analizleri aslında
important
iki
here
şirketi de
is
koruyacak şekilde
to make sure that both companies are
doğru
protected
maddelerin
according to the risk
konulmasıdır.
analysis,
Ben
and proper
çeşitli
sanctions and
görevler
articles are
yaparken
imposed.
arkadaşlarımdan
As I was in
özellikle
different duties and posts, I
imza işi
used
için
to
evrakları getiren arkadaşlar benden çok eleştirirlerdi beni. Onları çok yorardı.
be criticized a lot
Nedeni
by the
çok
people
evrak
who used to
gönderdi.
bring the
Sebebi de
documents to me
etikle
for
ilgili
signature, and the
hükümlerin
reason
olmaması.
is I used to
Ve
send back
bir müddet sonra
many
öyle bir
documents
alışkanlık oldu
unsigned
ki
because of lack of
herkes,
ethics
Tümkan
and
Bey
compliance,
hayatta
and it became
Halbuki
habituary.
yanlış
Then
soru.
people got to
Tümkan Bey
understand
ilk
that
seferinde
Turkan
imzalar ama
would
şunlar,
never
şunlar olması
sign
lazım.
at the first
Bir zaman
time.
aldı
Yes,
ama
I would,
başardı. Bir süre
but
sonra
provided
ben
that there are some
söylemeden
conditions
otomatikman
fulfilled.
onu
So after a
kontrol
while, we
ederek getirmeleri
accomplished that
hakikaten
text
hani o
was brought according to
yolculukta
some
doğru bir şey yaptığımı
standards.
bana
And this
açıkçası
really
düşündürdü.
showed me that I was doing the
İkincisi,
right thing to teach
paydaşlarımızdan
people to do that. Secondly, we're speaking
siz
of
kendi
the
aranızda
stakeholders.
bir takım
And within
özgürlük
your
alanlarınız
own
var, daha
practice,
rahat
you have
konuşuyorsunuz.
your
Ama
ways of
paydaşlara geldiği
freedom, and
zaman
you're just talking
sınırlar nerede
more
başlıyor, nerede
comfortably. But when it comes
güzel
to
bir örnek verdiniz
stakeholders,
siz
where
de.
would the boundaries start
Bence
and
sınırlar
end? It's a very good
bu
example
konuda
you've
hem
given me.
seçkiye
In
konusunda
that,
hem de
both
etik
in
ve
terms
uyum
of safety,
konusunda
security,
sınır
environmental
kabul etmemeliyiz.
environment,
Niye
I
kabul
think there is no
etmemeliyiz?
limit we need to take
Çünkü
there.
hepimizin
Why
aslında
not? Because we
ortak bir amacı var.
all serve for a
Ve
common purpose.
birçok şirket gibi,
As many
sizin şirket
companies
gibi, bizim
as
şirket
yours,
gibi
as ours,
buna uymayacak
those
bir
who
paydaşla çalışmak
we
istemeyiz.
refuse to work with the stakeholders
de
who would
paydaşlara
not
çok
be
açık
abiding by
beklentilerinizi
our
söylemeniz
standards.
lazım.
So you need to
Ama bu
make clear
beklentileri
to your
söyledikten sonra da
stakeholders what
hakikaten
kind of
kontrol etmeniz
expectations
lazım.
you have for
Çok paydaş
standards.
var
But
da işte, tamam ya
after
bunlara evet
making
diyorum deyip,
it
ondan sonra
evident,
da
you
kontrol
need
olmadığı
to
zaman,
be quite clear
nasıl olsa
and
kontrol
have
edilmiyor'nun
the
rahatlığıyla,
controlling
bunlara
involved in the
vermeyebilir.
process as well.
O yüzden de kontrol
And therefore, the
mekanizmasını
control
çok önemsiyorum.
mechanism, I think, is critical.
Tabii bütün bu sistemin çalışabilmesi için
For the entire system to work, the safe
lazım.
environment should be created
Arkadaşlarım,
because
bu rahatlıkta, bu açıklıkta,
in such clarity, for people to be talking in such clarity and confidence, they need to make sure that there would be
son
no
olarak
negative feedback to them. Finally, there are many records about ethical compliance. Like, for instance, if you're going out for a dinner, 10 forms you need to fill in. And in first year, many gifts come. I mean, we just check online from the market about the prices. Is it 10 lira, 40 lira? I don't know. Don't send me any gifts. And it's really a big challenge. Sometimes we're losing people for that. But there is a reason all for that. Why? Because, you know, many people think it's just they're doing it because the company asks for it. But essentially, they're not aware that they're doing it to protect themselves. And I would like to share with you an anecdote, a memory of mine. We all have friends, right? Close relatives. And they are all maybe working in a company, and in those companies, as in here, as in other settings, they may be in a business relationship. One of the questions that I get a lot is, when I push my friend too much, they would just tell me, don't tell anyone. I have a very close friend of mine who is working in one of our competitors. Would that be a problem? yes, I mean, this may be the case. There is no problem. There is nothing wrong about it. And if from the beginning you need to be quite clear about your friendship with that person, and if you enter it into the records, and these are smart things, there are algorithms to that. And if you enter,
Çok sağ olun hep beraber.
Evet, ama Covid değil. Onu söyleyelim.
this is not COVID, right?
Dolayısıyla bununla ilgili
If you just be clear about your relationship, what kind of an extra measure would you take about it? And then you think, so obviously I need to do something, and I will not be able to talk about this and that other than in the chatting setting. And this is a commitment of yours. Ethics and compliance, I think, will be critical because you automatically follow those principles. I know I've spoken too long, but to wrap up briefly, there are 6 steps to follow. First, be aware, be trained, either by watching videos with experiences. Number 2, watch the processes. The processes are there in all companies for health, safety, security, and ethical compliance, but it's the human nature. You would sometimes choose not to follow or to apply, or we are confused. Third is the red flag, or the signals, which are some, you need to sniff the environment. If there is something weird, you may feel it. If there is some customer who wants to buy 500,000 items of something without asking for the price, you would feel it. And if this is the case, you must share it with people. And do not keep your anxiety or concerns for you. And one of the biggest mistakes is, I will be saving the company, I'm not sure, but if it's not something big. But once it happens, people may be asking, why didn't you let others know? And saying that I would have let others know if only I knew it would come to that. Number 5 is auditing, extremely important. And last but not least, number 6, before going to that dinner, before accepting the gifts, you need to be cautious about the conflict of interest. Although it might take some time, you must fill in that registry book. Thank you.
Oldu. Bakıldığında
It's been great, a journey in the horizon. Of course, you have to be really very sensitive in working with too many countries and by having high quality work. And of course, from A to Z, we have to follow the rules. And of course, we have to raise awareness, educate people, and so on. But what is important is actually to create the platform, the environment for this, and to audit. You mentioned that. And repeat it so as to deploy the culture there. I mean, you need to have a supervision all the time, continuous education, and create the environment. And it's a must, actually. And therefore, you need some checklists. What should I do in this case? Where should I report? And so on. And now where to cross the borders and about identifying the borders. There could be some gray areas and so on, but we should never cross the red lines. Maybe more to digital ethics from your side, what would you say? Because digital ethics is a brand new field, as you all know. And I think in the field of health, there are also some other indications as well. From this perspective, from your own area, what are the innovations for digitalization, what it creates in terms of ethics and compliance? What are the things that you pay attention to? Are there some specific cases that you would like to share with us? From an example, Tümkan gave, I recently experienced this. It is either digital or physical. I mean, what could be the difference between digital meetings and physical meetings? And it was a contract we were supposed to do with a partner, and for 6 months for digitally, by way of emails and digital meetings, and there was an issue not solved, a contract that cannot be signed. And then I said, let's just come face to face, have a physical meeting. Actually, in 15 minutes, we signed the contract because both sides were speaking about the same thing, but they actually could not communicate digitally. And in pharmaceuticals, whenever you're, for example, making a development in the field of a drug or customized, for example, a customized preventive treatment, for example, of course, collection of data from certain databases is important. And pandemics created an opportunity. In saying the drugs industry by someone from inside, I know that there's some question marks in the minds of people. I know it from the times of the pandemics, but vaccine, you know, in 2 years, in such a short span of time, the vaccine developed and introduced in our lives. And as Mr. Eden stated, of course, there are people who have access to it and who does not have access to the vaccine. It's a difference, but once at the global level, it ended up with a well-being once everyone has access to this. Maybe with regards to newly onset disease, developing a product, a medicine took 10 years maybe, but in 2 years of in such a short span of time, vaccine developed and offered to the use of the community. I don't know, maybe pandemics created an opportunity for the pharmaceutical industry in terms of having a better reputation in the eyes of the people. In patient relations, the artificial intelligence using the data and all is really very important for developing drugs and preventive medicine in early diagnosis, for example. It actually can create a lot of impetus, and but it ended up with lifting some of the borders. For example, it is possible to have access to very private data. And this is the case for the pharmaceutical industry, but in Turkey, our most important customer, it is the state. Therefore, we are subject to very strict regulations. We have to abide by these rules. They're all identified. For example, we actually have there's a booklet published by a guide by the Ministry of Health, and so as to we have the investigators for the pharmaceutical society. They also have some promotion guidelines as well. For promotion, you have to strictly follow these. In the United States, for example, there are so many fines imposed, and as a result of this, it can actually make a company went bankrupt with a very big company. But as Sinem also stated, if we're speaking about new technologies and developing those, because we don't have the rules for this, and therefore we have to introduce rules of ethics at this point. And with regards, it is predictable impacts, consequences, what could be. I mean, we have to predict the consequences. I don't know, maybe there could be some steps that we can now take, so it also will be helpful for the regulators later, once they start making rules. It is either digital workplace or remote working and so on. It was a challenge to us. Why? Because in our field, as you all know, we always make visits, and so as to introduce our products, or we, for example, attend congresses, seminars, so we make sure that the physicians know about our products. And during the pandemics, it goes down to zero. I mean, without digital platforms, not possible. We would do nothing. We did all these promotions and all the launching through the screens. And of course, it brings some new rules of ethics and compliance, and we strictly follow them. For example, we have an event there, and we make sure that our organization knows about these rules. Sometimes we made some mistakes, we observed some mistakes. It's pretty normal. I mean, not possible not to make any mistake. As you all know, at the same time, it's also possible to accept some of these mistakes, so it will not be hidden. And so we can work on the solutions. Awareness is important. I mean, to make sure that, as you all know, we have to know that our co-workers, our employees also have a family and intimacy of the home. For example, avoiding sequential meetings. After 5, not sending any email. During the weekend, not oblige people to work during the weekends. We remind ourselves, we remind our executives on this. And we also establish some platforms that we can hear the voices of the employees. Because, you know, in the past, with the sliding door or with the elevator, leaving the plaza, your physical office, it was a limit, it was a boundary. But now I'm also trying to, for example, from time to time, I had so many times that I was with my family and saying that, oh, I have to go and check something on my computer and so. And we have taken some action so as to avoid these. Thank you, Sinan. We will just move to the cocktail, but we're just going through the very last round, and I feel we're just between cocktail, the reception, the drink, and a nice discussion. Very last question, and then we will leave. Of course, independent from time and venue that you're trying to work, independent from location, what type of rules we should set about, for example, the gift policy, and also, for example, making the promotions remotely, and all that. You underlined important things, but it is possible to make mistakes. We have to make sure that no mistakes are done, but you're saying that we have to communicate it so people will not hide it. And therefore, it's important that you find solutions for this. So, last question. A common question for all. For ethics and compliance, one of the most important things is leadership, responsible leader, their sense, the actions that they take, decisions that they take. And you are the very first female general manager, country manager of L'Oréal. You're as a global giant, and is Sinem. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to do? I mean, what type of a leader you are for ethics and compliance? Very briefly, please. L'Oréal is trying to lead beauty with beauty, with inclusiveness, and therefore I'm just trying to lead a leader company by giving beauty as a role model. Therefore, having courage, respect, and transparency. Also, they're very much compliant with actually my personal values, and I'm considering as my North Star, because it's actually a chain effect. It starts with the leader. It's all about the leader's faith on this issue, about the importance that the leader attaches to it, whether the leader is actually a role model or not, and of course by deploying it to the entire organization. It's not something that you can do alone. Each and every employee actually should internalize ethics, and it must be a part of the culture. What are we doing in L'Oréal? It's okay, I'm not going to show you an accreditation just like these ambitions, but we're actually the only company that actually spares a whole day for ethics, and one day, ethics day, and in 150 countries, all the country CEOs together with the employees giving answers to the questions that regards ethics one day in a year, and we're just trying to make this something that is discussed. And there is a country ethics representative, and Sinem is with us, the ethics representative of Turkey, L'Oréal, and therefore you give responsibility for that one person, and you make sure that the main responsibility of that person is to deploy ethics every day. We have policies in place for all. For example, about the way that we work with our suppliers, anti-corruption, for example, procurement, and so on. We have quite a long list. It's very important for these policies to be accessible. But more importantly, we make sure that the entire employee experience is based on ethics. For example, your ethics and compliance from the stage of the recruitment, during the orientation, showing the references about ethics. It starts from the very beginning, and even in the in the employee satisfaction questionnaire, you have the same thing. For example, we have a satisfaction questionnaire survey every year, and we ask questions about survey. For example, one of the questions is it possible for you to speak up any issue of unethical behavior, for example? Are you free to say it? Are you free to refer it? Or, for example, even asking whether your supervisor can well handle issues with regards to ethics, these types of questions. And it's very important to be proactive, of course, but being reactive is also important. I mean, in such a case, you have to be brave enough, courageous enough, whether you do any interaction with this, so as to have the culture confidence of. And our suppliers, they're a part of it, like social audits, for example, whether they have actually a child worker or so, whether they have any history of corruption or not, you have to prove it. Even in our own financial audit inside, the team that's coming there is actually, there is actually an ethics assessment is made with the country manager and the financial manager. What type with the CFO and CEO, what type of actions you are taking and so on. They also during the internal audit ask this question. I'm sure that if we are around the red and the orange, especially in countries like us, you have to also make a self-assessment. And in standards of L'Oreal, you have to assess your team's actions about this, and you have to set some goals, something very critical. At the end of the day, ethics is not something that you live only one day. It must be every day, because corporate communication is a part of your reputation. And I also would like to thank TEİD for giving us this opportunity. It's really very important. Personally, I always ask myself two questions. The first thing is, do I have the right to do it, this legal right to do this? And the second, is it right to do it? For example, today, for example, as someone, for example, as the beauty, for example, ambassador, can I, for example, select a woman who is very lean, like 0 size? No, I can't do it. If I have to make a tough decision, for example, I always ask to myself, in the very well-known platform in Turkey, if this decision is, for example, communicated with my signature under it, will I do this? Yes. If I have any question mark in my mind, I just stop and rethink it. So, actually, it is just to lead with beauty, and at the same time to lead what is right, and at the same time it's a version of don't do something that you don't want to be treated as. Also, you mentioned about the question as the employee satisfaction surveys and so on. It's an important frame, of course. Now, of course, we will move to also risk-based assessment, how important they are, and so on. If you're, for example, as the son, as the father of a daughter, and responsible of being the father, and the change in your perspective to life. And of course, you have a professional background with so much technical knowledge. You're also a father at the same time, and all. So from this, how BP is vision is, your vision is, and responsible leadership, what would you like to say? Leadership, from time to time, you are sometimes consciously or unconsciously as a leader, with each and every one of your moves, you know that people get something from you. They learn something from you. We are not aware of this, but I had an something interesting happen to me. From time to time, I make open office hours, I mean open door. It's possible for anyone to bring a cup of coffee and have a chat. We're just going through challenging times, as you know it, so people all need this, having such a conversation, because I also learn a lot. In one of those conversations, one of my friends said, it was actually quite a stressful day and you were crossing by, and you made a joke, and we laughed, and my stress totally relieved. At that time, I never thought that it was something important. I mean, I just passed by and made a joke, and so, because, you know, somehow in the place that I live for so long, I'm just trying to make people happier around me. That's my personal mission, because that's the only way that you can spend all those hours there. And so at that time, I once again understand how important leadership is. That person taught me about this. So we all have work experience, life experience, and it is not only important to know what to do, but also what not to do. I have a book
22 yıllık profesyonel
And
hayatımda
in
yapmamam
my
gereken şeyleri
22-year
yazdım.
professional life, I
İlk
write
yılından
on this
başlayarak böyle
book
liste
what
biraz uzun
I
oldu.
should not do. Of course, it was a long list, but
İsterseniz güç zehirlenmesi
and
diye,
for
isterseniz
example, I don't know,
unutma
maybe it
diye.
is power
İnsanlar genelde
intoxication or forgetting
kariyer
about this or
basamaklarını
so on. But in your career
aldığı
steps,
zaman, yükseldiği
once you
zaman
go
onları
through your
unutmaya
career
başlıyor. O
steps, you
yüzden çok
start to
değerli
forget
buluyorum ve
things.
her hafta
That's the
bakarım
reason.
o
And
kitapçıya.
I look
Bunları
at that
yapıyor
book
muyum?
every
Bazen
single
farkında olmadan
day.
yaptığım şeyler de
Because
çıkıyor.
there are things
Ama
that
bu
I
değerli
must
bir
not
kazanım.
do.
Yani bunu
But it is
devamlı
something
hatırlatmamız
important.
lazım.
I mean, we have to remind ourselves about this all the time.
Hiçbirimiz bu
Why?
pozisyonlara
Because
doğumdan bu yana gelmedik. Yani
we are
kimse,
actually
Tümkan,
not
ülke başkanı
leaders
olarak
as
doğmuş
born.
diyemeyiz.
I
Yani
mean,
hepimiz
no one becomes
bu
a country
pozisyonlara
manager
bir yolculuktan sonra
by birth.
geldik.
I
Bir
mean,
şeyler
after a
öğrendik ve
journey, we
öğrendiğimiz
become
şeyleri
country managers. We
uygulamak
learn
zamanı
things, and it's now
çok
the time
önemli.
to apply
Olaya böyle
them.
baktığınız zaman
From this
aslında
perspective, I would
birçok şeyin
say many
nelerin
of the things, I
motive
mean,
edebileceğini,
what
nelerin
actually
etmeyeceğini
can
görüyorsunuz.
motivate us or
BP'de
not
şu anda
motivate us.
kullanılan bir
In BP,
liderlik anlayışı var. Buna
there is
servant
a
leadership deniliyor.
severity leadership.
Yine bunun
that we
Türkçesi
call,
hizmetkar liderlik. Çok
I don't know
belki fazla bir şey
what type of a
anlam içermiyor
Turkish
olabilir ama biraz
terminology
bunu
it
açmak
would have,
isterim.
but
Nedir bu liderlik?
what do we mean by
Şimdi
this
biz
type of
72
leadership?
kuşağı olarak daha
As the
değişik bir liderler
72
gördük.
generation, we've seen
Hepimiz
too many
korkarak
different
bildiğimiz
leaders,
liderlerimiz
and
olmuştur.
the
Olmadıysa
leaders
ne
that
mutlu
we
size.
fear
Ama
them
benim
so.
şahsen oldu.
But for myself, for example, we have too
Ve
many
o
leaders. I
dönemlerden
had too
geçtik.
many leaders that I
O dönem
feared.
o normların doğru
And
olduğunu bize
we thought
söylerdi.
that during
O
those
zaman da
times,
çok aklıma
those norms
yatmamıştı.
were
Şimdi hiç
correct.
yatmıyor.
I did
Çünkü
not
hiçbir
like
zaman
them at
doğru
that
bulmadım.
time, also not
Ama
today at
bu
all.
yeni tip
But
liderlik
this
hakikaten benim
new
kalbime de yakın bir
type of
liderlik. Bu
leadership is
liderlik
something
anlayışı
very
aslında
close to my heart,
basitçe
because
şunu
this
diyor.
understanding of
Herkesi
leadership
olduğun
is
gibi
saying
kabul
that
ediyorsun ve
accept
herkese
everyone as they
potansiyelini
are,
maksimuma çıkarmak
and
için
to
ne
maximize the
yapacağını
potential
düşünüyorsun.
of everyone.
Sen
Think about what you
yönetici
can
olarak
do.
her
As a
şeyin en
manager,
doğrusunu bilmek zorunda değilsin.
you don't have to do
Duygusuz
the best
olmak
of
zorunda
everything.
değilsin.
You don't have to be
Yeri
free from
geldiği
your
zaman duygularını
emotions.
gösterebilirsin.
Show your feelings when
Ama kucaklayıcı
necessary,
olmak zorundasın.
but you actually
Kendin gibi
have to
olanları seçmemek zorundasın.
embrace people. You should not select
Çeşitliliğe
people
önem
like
vermek
you. You
zorundasın.
have to pay attention to
Farklı
diversification.
görüşlere
I mean,
önem vermek
at the
zorundasın.
same
Ve
time, you have to
dolayısıyla
respect two different
çalışanın
ideas, and
motivasyonunu
therefore you
üst düzeyde
actually
tutmak
have to
zorundasın.
maximize the
Yine
motivation
Demet Bey
of your
sizden örnek
employees.
vereceğim.
And Mr.
Öyle bir
Erdem,
konuştunuz ki bütün
you
paneli
actually
aldınız
addressed
götürdünüz.
such
Bu
a
arada
keynote
onu da
that
söylemek
everyone is
lazım.
making reference to
Şimdi
you, by the
çok
way,
güzel
all
bir
the
şey
time
söylediniz. Sahip
for your
olmama,
keynote
ait
speech.
olmama.
It is whether
Yine
to own
çocuklarıma
or to belong.
dönüyorum. Ben baba
And
figürü
for
olarak
example,
böyle
as the
yapacaksın
father
dediğim hiçbir şey
figure,
yaptıramadım.
I never,
şeyi
for
doğruladım.
example,
Ama
could
ne
do
zaman
anything
ki
that I
ait
dictate.
olma hissini verebildim, o
Once I
zaman çok şey
give
başardım.
them the feeling of
İş
belonging,
yerinde de
I
böyle abi.
make them do
Yani,
a lot of things. Same in my workplace.
Değişik kuşaklar bir
I
arada
mean,
çalışıyor.
because different
Ve o
generations are
kuşaklardan
working
biz de çok
together,
şey öğreniyoruz.
and we also
Ve
learn a
öğrendiğim
lot from
şeylerden
those
bir tanesi,
generations.
ya
And one of the
kardeşim,
things that
sen
I
benim
learned from
sahibim
them
değilsin.
is that you are not my owner.
Dolayısıyla benim
And
istediğim
therefore,
şeyler olmazsa da ben giderim.
if the things are not
Bu da-
as I
buna
like,
da
I
okey
will
demek
leave.
lazım. Çünkü
You also should be
önemli
okay
olan
with this, because what is
insanlara
important
gönlünce
is
iş yaptırabilmek,
um,
ait olma duygusundan geçiyor.
you
Bunun
have
için
to
de liderlerin
make people
rolünün
feel
çok büyük
the
olduğunu
belonging.
açıkçası
I mean,
düşünüyorum.
I think there is actually a
Bizim
huge role for
etik
the
kodumuzun
leaders
ilk
on this.
sayfasında güzel bir
And
cümle var.
in
Onu
our
çok seviyorum.
webpage of the ethics, it says there's a nice
ne
sentence
yaptığımız kadar
saying that
nasıl yaptığımızı da
it is not
önemseriz.
important
bu hakikaten
what we do, but
düşünülmesi
what is
gereken bir
important to
cümle.
us is
Çünkü
also how we
en
do
basit
it.
işten en kompleks işe
Because from the
kadar
very
işin
simple
yapma
task to
şekilleri
the most
olabilir.
complicated, there
Ama
could be different ways of
yanlış
doing
iş yapma
business. But
şekli
the
birçok
way of doing
sorunları da
wrong
beraberinde
business will
getiriyor.
bring along too many
Yine
problems.
birisinden alıntı
And
yapacağım.
also reference from
Yosmin
someone
Erdoğan.
else, Gökçen.
Şimdi insanoğluna baktığınız zaman
For humanity, I mean for
insanoğlu
in
oksijen
general
almak
human
zorunda.
beings, they need
Ticari işletmeler
oxygen. It's a
olarak
must.
bizler de
And
para
as the
kazanmak zorundayız.
commercial
Doğru mu? Yani bunun
enterprises, we
aksini
have to
söylemek
make
yok.
money, right? It's a
Zaten
must.
aksini söylersek de
If you say
işletme
so,
sınıfının birinci
then
sınıfındaki
probably
görevlerimiz
you actually will fail in grade
çiğnemiş
one
oluruz
of
diye
your
düşünüyorum.
business school because
Ancak
you are responsible for
ben
your
bugüne kadar hiçbir
shareholders.
insanın
But
bana gelip
I have
benim
never
yaşama
seen
amacım
anyone
oksijen
coming
almaktır
to me
dediğini
saying
duymadım.
that the reason why I live is to get oxygen, to breathe. No one will say anything because we all have more ultimate goals. I will change the world and so on. I will make a difference and so. And Mr. Erdogan said we have net zero target by 2050, but it's really very easy to set these goals, but the way to 2050 all depends on what we'll be doing in the upcoming 10 years. If we fail to do those in the upcoming 10 years, then we cannot reach the 2050 goals. But one other important thing is that, I mean, we have to focus on this question now. Why? Because as you all know, if we cannot reduce it down 1.5 degrees centigrade, then there will be no world for our children. Is there another more problem than this? Are we at this level? No. And that's the reason why, yes, maybe some of these rhetorics may not feel like sincere, but we will have to be very careful about the upcoming 10 years energy transformation issue. Once we transform energy, once we transform business models, then we will transform leadership. Another topic is gender equality issue. We are what, at 2022, almost half, and we're still discussing about this, and we always ask the same question. For my son and daughter, are we at the world that I would like to leave as a legacy to my children? No. But it is actually the bitter reality. We've got a long way to go. Sometimes, for example, I attend some meetings, I check my right side, left side, and I cannot see the diversity. Why is this the case? I mean, why this happens? That's the reason why it is something that you can change by numbers. I know there are some numerical targets in some companies, 10% and so on. But what is going on during those meetings, in the rooms that you do not exist? How do people feel? Sometimes I cannot sleep, really. And maybe there is actually the need to take some more courageous again. And my daughter, for example, is criticizing me a lot about this. And we also have to be very careful about the language that we use, sometimes consciously or unconsciously, with some absurd terms in the office or, I don't know, in the social environment and so on. We can actually have a slip of tongue and so. Back to the leadership. About leadership, as I told you, it's not actually a one-day thing. You actually have to do it every single day. And for example, you always start the meeting with, for example, the starting question or starting sentences. For example, I prefer to do this with ethics and compliance. For example, at the beginning of a meeting, I give examples of ethics and compliance from my daily routine. Why? Because people should not feel alone. And as you mentioned, you have to act fast. And sometimes, once you act fast, you may give a wrong decision. But you don't need to rush, actually. It's possible that you actually can get some inspiration from someone who's already experienced on this, and a better decision can well be taken. Thank you very much. So, thank you, Sinan. It's actually, it's very important to make an effective touch in a moment, just like a smile that can change the perspective. Those minor touches, someone down when she approaches to you, even changing his or her mood is so important. In law, we always say what is actually important is the procedure, the way you do it, rather than the content, the essence. Of course, what we did is so important, but how we did is also so important. There are many things that we can say, but without the feeling of belonging, it's not possible. People should internalize it. And speaking about the purpose, it is not only about getting oxygen or breathing. You should not be at this point at all, which you mentioned so well.
And turning to Sinan. Responsible leadership, quite briefly, what I feel when I hear about it. Values. Values are the things that will bind people to companies as the generations are changing. If people only can make a contribution, they would stay in that company. And as leaders, we have the responsibility that people are positioned according to you, with you noticing it or not. Any kind of acts or behavior of yours would be followed. Therefore, I think it lies in the behaviors of the leader that will make such actions convincing for others. I am touched by the examples by Tümkan. Actually, if any person would give anecdotal expressions, that would really make sense. As I now remember, a colleague of mine, I'm sure his ears are burning now, and he shared with me an understanding of his. Measuring success not on figures but on values and behaviors. He said, you are doing it as such and I like it the way you are doing, and I wasn't aware of it. And after that day I intentionally started giving out messages in that respect. I've been working for the same company for the last 15 years, and I'm telling to my colleagues, I never tell it at the year-end meetings that we failed to meet the targets which were financially this and that. So be it a downturn or a crisis time, what is really important is to make sure that our values survive. Only then financial success is to follow. 1250 BC, I would like to go to 2400 BC. In the Oath of Hippocrates, for the first time there is this statement about the first responsibility of a professional, and the Latin is primum non nocere, do not harm intentionally above all, which is actually the foundation of the public ethics. I think this is the rule of thumb which I try to adhere to in my life. Wonderful. Thank you. Actually can also be interpreted in different domains of life. Do not harm. First, ethics, values, and defining success with values is something hopefully that we can do more. Well, with a closing remark, I'd like to just state that we started off by saying that indeed, when speaking about the future of ethics and compliance, we need to also keep in mind what we do or do not do right now. Therefore, whatever we pay attention to, whatever we make sure will happen or not, the future of Turkey, of our company, of us will be shaped around it. And I'm sure that this responsibility lies in all of us. Too big to fail, and then turned into too big to fail. I mean, if a corporation looks quite healthy, quite big, it's not an assurance in itself. As in the Titanic, it was the biggest, gain, the biggest potential economic gain in the world, the biggest ship ever built. But a healthy control and audit system. Not system meaning not just one person, which they missed the iceberg, only one person was watching. And the second thing is, despite all of these things, unless there is a proper background, a safety system or protective system or an escape system, I think must be somehow built. Ethics is quite, simple when only you follow it, and quite challenging if you do not follow it properly. And only this way we will be seeing ethics and compliance more in our companies, in our practice, in our lives. I would like to thank all of the panelists from the bottom of our hearts, and would like to close the session, and we would be more than happy and honored if you would attend the cocktail, which is online now, and hope to stay in touch. As the family of the Ethics and Reputation Society, I would like to wish all of you the best.
Biz de sayın moderatörümüze ve panelistlerimize
Thank
çok
you,
teşekkür
Mr.
ediyorum.
Moderator and distinguished panelists, but I need to keep you waiting here a bit longer. Before we leave for the cocktail, there is a family photo that we are destined to take. But before that, I would like to acknowledge and thank the panelists. And Ranan, you are kindly invited to the floor. Also, Kayra Ölçer, also you are invited to the floor to deliver our tokens of appreciation with your applause. Please, of course, to Mr. Moderator first.
Seyirciler. Çok teşekkürler.
Tamam.
TEİD olunca tabii gerçekten keyif.
Böyle. Tümkan Bey'e.
Çok mersi, çok teşekkür ederim.
Evet. Sinem Hanım'a.
Çok teşekkürler. Öyle mi? Çok teşekkür ederim. Mersi.
Kare Bey, bir de sizden ricam Sinan Bey'e. Bu güzel tablo için alkışlarınızı almayı rica
And
ediyoruz.
may I get your applause for this wonderful picture?
Evet. Bir hep beraber bir tekrar fotoğrafınızı alabilirsek.
And if we may take a photo together.
Evet. Bu aile fotoğrafı alınırken yıllar çok hızlı geçiyor. Elimizde
Years are
kalan en güzel
passing
anılarsa
by
fotoğraflar. Burada da çok
fast,
güzel
and
bir
the
aile var.
photographs are
Kokteyle
all
çıkmadan
that
önce
remain.
tam
So
olduğunuz
before we
noktada
leave
ayağa
for the
kalkmanızı rica
cocktail,
edeceğiz.
please can you
Arkadaşım
stand up
güzel bir aile
wherever you
fotoğrafını da
are,
almak istiyor
and
ki
we will
gelecek
take a
yıllarda
family photo
o
all
yapıyı hep
together
birlikte
so that
kurgulayalım.
we will
Sizleri de
see,
isterseniz ön
look at
sıraya
it
alabilirsek.
and be proud in the years to
İki tane
follow.
poz rica edeceğiz.
Two
Ben biraz
poses.
yönlendirmek zorunda kalacağım çok fazla
And
kişi olduğumuz için.
unfortunately, I will
İlk
have to
başta
guide you
olduğumuz
through
yerde
it.
kalalım.
First, let's stay wherever we
Sizi
are.
buraya alalım isterseniz. Evet.
Please stay.
Sağ olun. Sizleri de isterseniz aile fotoğrafını aşağıya da davet edelim. Tamam. Sahnenin ışığını kapatabilirsek, beyaz ışığı, teknik
If
arkadaşlardan
we can
rica
dim
edelim.
the lights
Salonun
a bit
ışığını
on
açalım.
stage.
Ben biraz böyle yönlendirmek zorunda kalacağım ama sonra çok güzel bir kokteylimiz var, inanılmaz boğaz
And this
manzarası.
is to be followed by the wonderful
Evet.
cocktail to be served by the view of our wonderful, beautiful Bosphorus.